Picture this. You're in a meeting. You've done the work, you know the numbers cold, you prepared for this, you rehearsed the one line you wanted to land. And the second you open your mouth, someone talks over you. Not loud. Not dramatic. Just casual. Like what you were about to say didn't quite register as important enough to finish hearing. And then, 10 minutes later, a guy on your team says almost the exact same thing you just said. Same point. Sometimes even worse phrased. And suddenly everyone's nodding. Writing it down. Great point, Mike. You go back to your desk and you sit with that feeling for a second. That specific, quiet feeling of, wait, did that actually just happen? Am I imagining this? Am I being too sensitive? You're not imagining it. And you're not too sensitive. This exact scenario has been documented and studied so many times it has a name. And here's the part that's going to surprise you. There's a number, a specific, boring, unglamorous number, that quietly changes this dynamic. Not because it buys you a fancier outfit or a corner office. Not because anyone can see your bank balance. Because of what it does to you on the inside, in that exact moment, when you decide whether to speak up again or shrink back down. That number is $10,000. And by the end of this video, you're going to understand exactly why it works, how it works, and how to get there, even if you're starting from zero right now, even if that number feels impossibly far away today. Before we get into the content of this video, I want to note that all information in this video is for educational and entertainment purposes only and should not be considered financial advice. Always consult with a qualified professional before making any decisions regarding your money. Now, let's get into the video. My name is Emma, and I spend way too much time thinking about money and why women in particular get left out of, or underserved by, traditional financial advice. If any part of that meeting scenario sounded a little too familiar, do me a favor, hit subscribe now, because by the end of this video you're going to have a completely different framework for understanding why that happens, and more importantly, what actually shifts it. Okay. Let's dive in. So here's the thesis of this whole video, and I want to say it plainly because it's easy to misunderstand. This isn't about becoming rich. It's not about status, or a bigger house, or a nicer car showing up in the parking lot and suddenly earning you respect. This is about something much quieter, and honestly much more powerful, than any of that. It's about what changes inside you, in your posture, your voice, your willingness to push back, the moment you have enough money saved that you don't actually need this job to survive next month. Behavioral economists have a phrase for this. They call it walk-away power. And it's exactly what it sounds like. The psychological freedom that comes from knowing you could, if you truly had to, get up and walk away from a bad situation. Not that you want to. Not that you will. Just that you could. And it turns out could does almost all of the work here. Think about it like this. Have you ever noticed how differently you act in a relationship you know you could leave, versus one where you feel trapped? In the one you could leave, you say what you actually think. You set a boundary and you don't flinch when it gets tested, because deep down you know, if this really doesn't work, I'll be okay. But in the one where you feel stuck? You go quiet. You let things slide. You laugh things off that actually bother you. You shrink yourself down to keep the peace, because some part of you believes you can't afford the alternative. Work is exactly the same. Except the leaving isn't romantic, it's financial. And most of us are operating from a place of feeling stuck, not because we're weak, or too agreeable, or bad at advocating for ourselves. It's because, quite literally, we can't afford to lose this paycheck. Rent doesn't pause. The loan payment doesn't care how disrespected you felt in that meeting. And everyone in the room can feel that underlying tension, whether they realize it consciously or not. Here's a stat that stopped me in my tracks when I first came across it. Research on negotiation behavior has consistently found that people with an accessible financial cushion, savings they could tap into without panic, negotiate more assertively and are less likely to accept the first offer they're given, in salary talks and in day-to-day workplace pushback alike. The number isn't the point. The access to the number is the point. It's not about being rich. It's about not being financially trapped in this specific room, on this specific day. And there's a related finding that I think is even more telling. Studies on financial stress have found that simply having an emergency cushion, even a modest one, measurably reduces cortisol responses to conflict. In plain English, your body chemically calms down in tense situations when there's money in the bank. Not because the situation changed. Because your nervous system's read on "how dangerous is this" really changed. So let's make this real. Let's talk about Priya. Priya is 29. She works in marketing at a mid-sized company, makes about $58,000 a year, and for the first 3 years of her career, she had basically nothing saved. Every paycheck went out almost as fast as it came in: rent, student loans, the slow bleed of subscriptions and small conveniences that add up without ever feeling like a decision. And Priya noticed something about herself during those years. In meetings, she over-explained. She apologized before disagreeing: "Sorry, I just think, maybe." When her manager gave her more work with no more pay, she said, "Sure, no problem." And she meant it, in the moment, because saying anything else felt like a risk she genuinely could not afford to take. When a coworker took credit for her idea in a client call, she let it slide, because pushing back felt like it might mark her as difficult, and difficult felt dangerous when she had $400 between her and disaster. Then Priya started something small. She opened a separate savings account, one she couldn't see every time she checked her main balance, one that wasn't sitting right there tempting her, and she automated $200 out of every paycheck into it. Not a huge number. Not a dramatic lifestyle overhaul. No spreadsheet obsession, no extreme budgeting. Just consistent, boring, automatic. It took her a little over 2 years to hit $10,000. And here's what she told me changed: not at $10,000 exactly, but somewhere in that stretch between 5 and 10, when the number stopped feeling abstract and started feeling real, when she could picture actually surviving on it if she had to. She stopped pre-apologizing before she disagreed in meetings. When her manager tried the extra work, "Same pay, move again," she said, "I can take that on, but I'd want to talk about adjusting my role description and comp to reflect it," and she said it steady, not shaky. Not because she'd rehearsed a script for weeks. Because some part of her brain had quietly done the math: if this goes badly, I am not ruined. I have a cushion. I have options. That's the mechanism. That's the whole thing. It's not that $10,000 in a savings account changes what people say to you. It's that it changes what you're willing to say back, and that shift in you is the thing other people are actually responding to. Let's get into the psychology of this a little more, because I think this is where it gets genuinely interesting. There's a concept in behavioral science called scarcity mindset, and it's not about how much money you have in an absolute sense. It's about how much slack you have. Researchers who study scarcity have found that when people are operating under financial strain, their cognitive bandwidth actually narrows. It's not a metaphor, there's a measurable drop in available mental processing power, the same kind you'd see from something like sleep deprivation. You start making decisions from a place of fear and short-term survival, instead of long-term strategy. You say yes when you mean no. You avoid conflict that might jeopardize the one thing standing between you and disaster: your paycheck. And the wild part is, this isn't just an internal feeling. People pick up on it, whether they could name it or not. There's a well-documented dynamic in workplace behavior where people who present as more agreeable, more accommodating, more likely to say yes, regardless of gender, but disproportionately affecting women, because of how agreeableness is socially rewarded and expected from us specifically, get handed more of the thankless, invisible work and less of the credit for the visible wins. It's not usually a conspiracy. Nobody's sitting in a room plotting it. It's just a pattern that quietly rewards whoever seems least likely to push back, and quietly punishes whoever seems most likely to. $10,000 doesn't erase that dynamic entirely. Let's be honest about that. But it interrupts it. Because the moment you're not operating from scarcity, the moment some part of you knows you have 3, 4, 5 months of runway if you needed it, your nervous system relaxes just slightly. And that slight relaxation is visible, even if nobody could tell you exactly what they're seeing. It's in your tone. It's in how long you pause before responding to a dismissive comment instead of immediately softening it. It's in whether you let a silence sit instead of rushing to fill it with an apology nobody asked for. People don't consciously think, oh, she has $10,000 saved, I should treat her differently. Of course not. What they're responding to is the calm, the steadiness, the absence of that low-grade desperation that scarcity produces. And that steadiness, it turns out, is one of the most reliable, if quietly overlooked, markers of authority in a workplace, more reliable, honestly, than most of the confidence tips you'll find floating around. Now, I want to pause here and give you the actual numbers, because save some money is useless advice without a real breakdown. If you're making somewhere around $50,000 to $60,000 a year, $10,000 represents roughly 2 to 3 months of baseline expenses for most people in that range. That's the real-world translation of walk-away power. It's not infinite freedom, it's 2 or 3 months where you are not financially cornered into silence. 2 or 3 months is enough to job search without panic. It's enough to say no to something unreasonable without your next move being homelessness. Here's how that breaks down if you're starting from zero, like Priya was. Let's say you can realistically put away $200 a month, that's about $46 a week, roughly the cost of 2 takeout orders. At that pace, you hit $10,000 in just over 4 years. Bump that to $350 a month, and you're there in about 2.5 years. Bump it to $500 a month, and you're looking at closer to 1.5 years. And if your income allows for $700 or $800 a month, you could realistically be there within a year. The number that matters most here isn't the total. It's the automation. Priya didn't hit $10,000 through sheer willpower, gritting her teeth every month. She hit it because she made the decision exactly once, and then her own future good judgment never had to be relied on again. The money moved before she ever saw it, into an account she wasn't checking every day, sitting somewhere just slightly out of sight and out of temptation. That's the entire trick. Decide once. Automate it. Let time and boring consistency do the rest, on days you feel motivated and days you don't. But, and this is important, I don't want this video to become one of those just save your way to power oversimplifications, because that's not the full truth either, and I'd be doing you a disservice if I pretended it was. Here's the cautionary turn. $10,000 in savings does not fix a genuinely toxic workplace. It doesn't erase pay gaps that exist because of policy and structural bias, not personal savings behavior. It doesn't replace the very real, systemic reasons women get talked over, underpaid, and overlooked for promotion, reasons that go far beyond any one person's bank account, and that require actual structural change, not just individual financial discipline dressed up as a solution. If you're in a workplace where the disrespect is severe, chronic, or tied to something like harassment or discrimination, savings account or not, that's a conversation for HR, a lawyer, or your own exit plan, not something a savings goal alone is going to solve, and I never want you to feel like it's on you to fix something structural through personal thrift alone. What $10,000 does do is give you a floor. It gives you the internal permission to act like the version of yourself who has options, because you actually do. And that shift, small as it sounds from the outside, tends to ripple outward in ways that are hard to fully predict until you're standing on the other side of it. Speaking of standing on the other side of it, I want to take a second and mention a book that genuinely changed how I think about all of this, because it helped me put a lot of what I just described into an actual system instead of just a vague feeling I couldn't act on. It's called Get Good with Money by Tiffany Ali Che. What I found so useful about it isn't just the savings advice, it's that she breaks financial health down into 10 specific pillars, and one of them is entirely about building that cash cushion in a way that's realistic even if you're starting from genuinely nothing. What actually helped me was her framework for figuring out your must-save number based on your real expenses, instead of just picking a random target out of thin air. It made the whole walk-away power concept feel concrete instead of aspirational. I've linked it below if you want to check it out. Okay, let's bring this all the way back around. Remember that meeting from the beginning of this video? The one where you got talked over, and then watched someone else get credit for basically the same idea 10 minutes later? Here's what I want you to sit with. That moment wasn't a reflection of your intelligence, or your worth, or how good your idea actually was. It was, at least in part, a reflection of what the room could sense about your position, whether you seemed like someone with room to push back, or someone operating from a place where pushing back felt too risky to attempt. You can't control every dynamic in every room. That part's real, and I'm not going to pretend otherwise, no matter how many savings tips I hand you. But you can control whether you're the version of yourself standing in that room with options, or without them. And that's not about becoming a different person, colder or harder or less like you. It's about giving the person you already are a little bit of financial ground to stand on. $10,000 isn't a magic number. It's not going to fix a broken system by itself, and it's not going to rewrite office politics overnight. But it is enough to change the math running quietly in the back of your mind the next time someone talks over you, enough to be the difference between swallowing it and calmly saying, "Actually, I wasn't finished." Start where you are. Automate what you can, even if it's small, even if it's $25 to start. And give yourself the floor to stand on that you deserve, not because you'll need to walk away, but because knowing you could is sometimes exactly what lets you stay, on your own terms, with your voice intact. I'll see you in the next one.